Hey guys, welcome to an episode of Gedunk Podcast. Me and my co-host Bobby Jones. We are here, and we've got some stuff to talk about this week. Hopefully, this is an interesting, thought-provoking kind of discussion. And we're going to talk about Joe Biden. We're going to talk about the Democrats. We're going to talk about the decision to run for president and more broadly, what it is that you need when you got to wake someone up in the middle of the night for, to get to work and things like that. So I think this is going to continue to be relevant. There's still many octogenarians in politics on sort of both sides of the party, or sorry, both sides of the aisle, and certainly it's true with President Trump today. And so I think talking through this and how it happened, obviously this week and last week very much in the news with the release of the book, Jake Tapper's book, Original Sin. As well as the news that President Biden had has advanced prostate cancer as well. So, thanks for joining us and we'll dive in. If you haven't read the Original Sin, the book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, lately on social media, at least in my experience, Bobby, there have been what I'm seeing a lot on things like Blue Sky and stuff like that is a lot of sort of just pushback and, Jake Tapper's fucked up. This is a hit piece. This is going to help Trump. This is going to help MAGA, all those sorts of things. And having just finished the book, I don't see it that way. And I'm curious your thoughts.
And I'm in the middle of reading it now. I just got it maybe a day ago. And I'm going to tell you something, we've said this from day one, we're all about responsible leadership, right? Veterans for responsible leadership. And this has no party affiliation, right? The quality of your leadership matters more than anything else we select as people, whether you're talking the government, military, CEO of a Fortune 500, it doesn't matter. And what we are currently going through, in my humble opinion, is a generation of people, the baby boomers, who refuse to relinquish power to the next generation. And it's to the detriment of society. We're talking about Joe Biden because the book is out, but you're seeing it happen real time right now, too, with Donald Trump. If you look at his mental acuity from this term compared to his first one, compared to when he ran for office, it is a cliff. You see him repeating the same things. You see him not focused. It's there. Same thing happened with Biden. And what bothers me about this more than anything else is the people that surround both of these two men have covered up for this. The Democrats should be ashamed that they allowed him to seek a second term. You cannot tell me that they did not know these things were happening. And the same with the Republican Party. Right now, they are mitigating Trump's errors because they are very prevalent. And so they're trying to create a whole narrative to protect him. But it's there. It's there. And world leaders know it. When they meet with him, they're like, you see their reactions. You hear the things that leak out from governments and their news media. No one trusts anything that Trump says because they don't think his mental facilities are there.
Yeah, no, it's true. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. The book very much acknowledges or doesn't acknowledge it. It centers on the fact that this was a cover up of sorts, and multiple people sort of knew that Biden was declining mentally and was not sharp. I want to talk a little bit about what the organization that Bobby's now running, Veterans for Responsible Leadership, what it was like for us sort of seeing this. So, we still are an unaffiliated PAC, a political action committee. And we had as a goal the political defeat of Donald Trump and, for lack of a better term, MAGA candidates globally. The The reason for that is we view them as, if not true fascists in the literal definition of it, then very much fascist adjacent. And Trump, as their leader, was specifically unsuited for the office of the presidency, both by his mental powers, but also his psychological makeup. That is damaged goods, right? And so from the get go, the organization was focused on beating Donald Trump. And when Biden was elected in 2020, I very much thought the job would be done. I thought the Biden would be a one-term president. He didn't say that explicitly, but he certainly suggested that, saying he was going to be a bridge to the future. And I think it's worth putting out in hindsight, had he been a one-term president, maybe Trump is the president now, maybe he's not. I think probably he would not be if it was somebody else. However, Biden clearly gave the impression he was just going to do one term. And if he had done one term, I think history would look on him very kindly. In 2020, you've got COVID, you do the unselfish thing, you get rid of Trump and his mismanagement of the COVID crisis, not to mention all the other terrible things that he was doing, including the corruption, right? And Biden could have passed the CHIPS Act, passed the Inflation Reduction Act, ridden off into the sunset. We could have had a real primary. And instead, he chose not to do that. And there's this argument that, he had a real legislative accomplishment to run on. He was the sitting president. But on the other side of the ledger, there were consistent polls showing the American public, Democrats, Republicans, and independents all thought he was too old to do this. And that never went away. The guy's popularity, his approval rating after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, it zeroed, it got down into the 30s and it never recovered. There were so many points in that election cycle where we expected Biden to start his numbers to start to pick up. A big time for us was in April. There were a lot of political consultants who felt that as once it became apparent that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee and not Ron DeSantis, not Nikki Haley, you were going to have Biden start to look good by comparison. That was sort of the thesis of the case, right? And it never happened. And what were then rumors, but were largely founded rumors of him and his mental decline, it couldn't really be dismissed anymore. There were so many, and the Republicans had lied so much, Trump had lied so much, MAGA had lied so much, that it was hard for us, it was hard for me, certainly, to tell what was true and what was not. I didn't know Joe Biden. I've never met the man. I've never seen him, sort of speak at a fundraiser or anything like that. And so you're basing your thoughts on what really is kind of hearsay and spin. And there were two kind of red flags for me where I was like, ooh, and I'm talking about before the debate. The debate, we'll get to that. But the running VFRL prior to the debate, the first red flag, I went down with, friend of the show, Ken Harbaugh, to raise some money in New York City. And we had an audience with a gentleman who's fairly middle of the road, has made upwards of $1 billion in crypto. I'm not going to use his name because I haven't talked with him about this, but we sat in his office and kind of talked through, and this would have been about a month prior to the debate. And he said, I was sitting with Chuck Schumer last weekend, and he said, we're going to see how this debate goes. And, we wanted it in June to see how it goes. So we have enough time to, and the quote I remember is, this guy said, Chuck Schumer said, this is not a suicide pact. And if Biden doesn't look good in this debate, we're going to pressure him to step down. And he said that. And I mentally filed it away because I thought Biden was going to be the candidate. But, in hindsight, there were people who knew. The people who were in power knew. The people who were in power were sort of putting their head in the sand and really hoping for the best and hoping that, just as I'm sure many Republicans were with Donald Trump, they're hoping that, actually, maybe the emperor does have some clothes on, but he doesn't. And the second time that, really was kind of a red flag to me was hearing members of Congress that I really trust and think highly of, and be quoted. So I'm going to use their names in this case because they were quoted in the newspaper. Jason Crow and Seth Moulton, who are both straight shooters. Friends of VFRL, they are veterans, they are, moderate Democrats, they're men of integrity. And they both kind of were like, we need this guy to step down. And, it was really alarming. And then, I guess a third thing maybe was, the Clooney fundraiser where, George Clooney just came out and was like, hey, like this guy we got to switch him out. He cannot be running. And to have a major institutional donor like George Clooney say that publicly,
yes,
apropos of nothing,
yes.
I mean, that's a lot of smoke. There's probably fire there. And ultimately, we saw what happened in the debate. And that debate, I was with my wife's family. We were watching it, but we had a little VFRL group chat going on at the time. And I forget who it was, but someone on the team was basically like, I feel sick to my stomach. And I was like, yep, that's exactly how I feel. And so I'll shut up for a second.
No. I think you're bringing up very valid points, and it's kind of funny. And, you mentioned the debate. Everybody sees that as a line of demarcation. I was at because I was running for county commissioner down here in Georgia, and I was at a group watch party with all the Democrats in the county and beyond, actually. And you could have heard a pin drop by about 7 to 8 minutes in. And then people left early. And I remember talking to our chair. I said, there's no way that he's going to be able to stand for this election. No way. I mean, I said it just like that. But here's the other thing that I said, too. I said, and Trump's rambling, too. And if he was against someone competent, we'd be saying that about him. That's the part that, I think people fail to realize. If you go back and look at that debate, Trump was all over the place. But Biden was just so incoherent and so lost that it got lost in the shuffle. And so I remember coming home and turning on all the cable news channels to see the spin. And man, nobody had the skill set to spin this. They were like, hey, well, we'll have to wait for the second debate. He'll rebound. That was the narrative. And I'm like, there's no way in hell there's going to be a second debate. Then I heard, he had a cold or this, that, and the other, and didn't able to prepare. They came up with every excuse known to man. And I remember the Republicans going to town on him very easily. So if I took the clips of what the Republicans said about Biden in that debate performance, and I show clips of Trump's meeting with the South African president, the Canadian prime minister, the president of Ukraine, and run them back to back, right? And I have the same criticism that the Republicans had against Joe Biden, it would fit perfectly, because the overarching thing that we're talking about here, this is not to me an ageism thing. This is an egotistical thing. The baby boomer generation is amongst the most fascinating America has produced. Okay. For those who don't know, baby boomers are considered 1945, the end of 45 to 1960. It's after the Great World War II ended and everybody came home, had babies, moved to the suburbs, all this stuff, right? The baby boomers are the first generation in American history to really enjoy the modernity of the new 20th century America, right? The cars, everybody had a car, refrigerators, microwaves, TV, you name it. None of that had happened before. They got to experience it. And what's fascinating to me about it, they're also the first generation to collectively, overwhelmingly say no to a military draft. Vietnam is known for the baby boomers saying, hell no, we're not going. Even though their fathers did it, their grandfathers did it. Every time there was a draft, it happened. Don't get me wrong, there was bits of resistance every time there is a draft, but not like this. And the same people who said, no, I'm not going to do it, especially amongst the privileged class, became the yuppies of the 80s, making all the money, the culture. Donald Trump was at the head of that culture. You had TV shows like Dynasty, Dallas, and Falcon Crest, where opulence was shown everywhere. Money, 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 money. Me, 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 me. They became the me people. Was Gordon Gekko, Wall Street, that movie? It was about me, right? And no one really thought anything about it until now. Now you have people in their late 70s, early 80s, right? That's Trump, that's Schumer, that's Pelosi, that's all of these leaders that are in that age range who refuse to cede power to the next generation. When you look at the age of, hell, even Putin, and how much younger he is than Trump. When you look at the age of Zelensky, when you look at the age of the new prime minister in Canada, when you look at the age of the prime minister in Germany, look how much younger the leadership is.
Yeah.
And look how old ours is, Dan. You can't sit there and tell me that that does not have an effect on domestic and international relations.
No, I think that's right. And, it's not, as you say, it's not necessarily an age thing, but
right.
In this case, it clearly was. Right?
Yes.
So I'm curious. The thing everyone says about the president, right, is who do you want answering the phone at 3 a.m? And I think that is sort of a fair question to ask. I mean, it's a real question, but my take on it is, when you elect a president, it's a team, right? Unfortunately, or rather fortunately, you're electing not just a president, you're electing an executive branch, right? You're electing a SecDef, state, all NSA, all this stuff. So it's a little bit of an artificial question, right? Like if you have an incredibly confident, this is all hypothetical, by the way. You have an incredibly confident national security advisor and just like a mediocre president. Okay, you could present the guy or the gal with the options and they can choose A, B, or C, right? But there are moments of real crisis that occur. I mean, everyone thinks of 9/11, right? Or Pearl Harbor. But it's not just foreign invasion. Something that springs to mind would be like the Challenger disaster, right? Like who do you want? That occurred during the daytime, but let's say it had broken up at 3 a.m. They're gonna wake the president up. Or I actually just finished a good book on the Beirut bombing of the Beirut barracks, which occurred. Ronald Reagan's down at I think he's at the Masters, and they wake him up, and because this occurred at 6 a.m. in Beirut, so it was 2 a.m. DC time, right? And he starts to get moving, and my military experience and really my medical experience has never been such where I'm sort of standing a watch. Emergency room physicians, we work a shift, right? So I know that I'm on from midnight to 8 a.m. and whatever comes in during those times, I'm on, right? I'm not at home waiting by the phone.
Right.
But you, as a surface warfare officer, there must have been periods of time where you went to sleep.
Yep.
And turned over, the navigation of the ship to the officer of the day or whatever. And I'm curious what what is kind of, what is your take as someone who's been in that kind of situation?
Yep.
What is your take on who you want answering the phone at 2 a.m?
I can tell you, the surface warfare officer experience. So when I was XO of USS Anzio, cruiser, up to 500 people on board, Persian Gulf, this, that, and the other, second in command of that, if the captain was exhausted, then I would get that call in the middle of the night. And let me tell you something, when you wake up and having to get your bearings as reports are coming in, because the reports are time sensitive. It could be traffic. It could be something that's unidentified that poses a threat. The speed of which you have to get your bearings, and then the people giving you the report passing the pertinent information first so you can make initial decisions as they fill in the detail. I cannot stress to you how hard that is unless you have grown up doing it, right? And good captains at sea, they will have a standard way that they receive information because they understand how their brain works and they understand what they need to hear first in order to process the information, even if they're in their most tired state, or their alert state. There's a consistency of how they need that information presented. And all of them, nowadays have in their standing orders, this is how you will make a report to me if I have to be woken up. That's number one. Number two, as complicated as that was, when I got command, and I got command of riverine boats, squadrons all over the world, 5 different time zones. I'm in the Middle East, but I got people in 4 other time zones, and I'm still getting those reports, right? The time difference matters. The area of responsibility, area of operation matters, all that. That was even harder because I had to make shifts. Now, granted, I had people who were officers in charge on scene, but there were instances that the situation was so serious, I had to be notified, right? To switch from one part of the world to another and make coherent decisions or have a comprehension of what's happening is the hardest thing to do, which is what the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, that's what they have to deal with because it's a worldwide thing. So if I'm having issues making sure I understand that, and I'm in my, 30s and 40s, I'm trying to figure out how you can do this in your late 70s, early 80s. I just don't think it's possible. Now, that's just maybe I'm limited in my mental capabilities. I've been told that many times by my wife and other people, but, it's hard, Dan.
I think the counter argument is like, an elderly decision maker.
Yep.
It can give you a level of wisdom, right?
Yes.
There's many of times in both my medical career and my naval career where someone who was senior to me, and so the example that springs to mind from the Navy was during Operation Redwing. So when that happened, I was in country. I was in Afghanistan, and I was working with a SEAL group that was not the group involved in the raid, right? So I was in a different part of the country. And ultimately the person who kind of took control of that situation, because what happened when Red Wings occurred, you've got Christensen and McCreevy, who were the top 2 vanilla SEALs in the theater at the time. They both get killed. So all of a sudden the SEAL leadership is sort of decapitated, and there's like a JSOTF and there's a task force and stuff that can make some decisions, but it fell really to the dev group guys, to the SEAL Team 6 guys to kind of take over and unfuck that situation. And I was in the room when, people were leaning on this 06, this SEAL captain to, hey, we got to do this tonight. We got to go tonight. We got to get guys on the ground tonight. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And I was, no one to give a shit what I thought. I was a lieutenant junior grade, so I just kept my mouth shut. But I agreed with that. I was like, let's go, let's kick some ass, let's get on the ground. And this captain was like, let's pump the brakes, let's not sort of proverbially throw good money after bad. We just lost a helicopter. If we start sending in other helicopters, who knows how many more SAMs they got, And so he was like, no. It's already happened, right? The bad thing has already happened. Let's take our time and kind of be smart about this. And it was real wisdom on behalf of a guy who'd already parked a fucking bunch of helicopters all over Afghanistan, who was like, I'm not going to repeat the same mistake. Despite many people below him saying, go, 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 go. And that stuck with me as an example of a time when someone with much more experience than I had and more wisdom was able to pump the brakes and ultimately in hindsight that was the right decision. Like everything bad had already happened.
Right.
And probably would have got more people hurt if we just went screaming in there.
Let me follow up and ask you this. And the reason I'm asking this is because I think you bring up the wisdom piece is critical. But the thing that he did, just listening to you talk about this, it was the application of the wisdom. He been there, seen it, understood what had happened, and then applied it to you guys saying, everybody take a beat for a second. My issue and my concern with both what we're hearing about Biden, what we found out, and what's going on, I believe, with Trump is even just humor me for a second. It says and say Trump has some sort of wisdom on whatever the heck he gets called about. Just humor me. Do you believe that he has the mental stability, the intensity to execute what is needed in that critical moment? See, that's the difference. I believe you're talking about that captain. He been there, done that, and could apply the solution. We have plenty of people that come up with solutions and don't know how to execute. The commander in chief of the executive, as in execute branch of the government, needs to be able to do that. So you can have the best advisors, right? But the execution, go back to Vietnam, where you had Johnson, he had McNamara, who was supposed to be a wonder kid, right? As Secretary of Defense, and LeMay, who was a war hawk from World War II. You had wisdom and experience galore in that White House. Didn't mean it was combat effective when dealing with the Viet Cong, right?
The problem with Trump, right, is he's such I don't necessarily think anyone on MAGA would even disagree with this statement, but I think he's a very instinctive, impulsive decision maker.
Yes.
Right? He's like, yeah, this is what we're doing, right? And what made that captain in Afghanistan so ultimately effective and led to the right choices being made is it's not like he didn't want, we had just lost 19 guys. It wasn't like this guy didn't want to go kick some ass.
Right.
He overrode that part of his brain with wisdom.
Right.
Right. Like, right. It's not like he didn't want to kill some Taliban that night. It was like, he was like, no, right. We're going to take a pause.
Right.
We're going to do this right. And, yeah, I don't think Biden would have necessarily done that. And I strongly don't think Trump would do that. Right. I think Trump would say, like, let's go get him right now.
Right. And you kind of raised something too, that instinct that you talk about that his supporters say they love, right?
Well,
the instinct thing, it sort of just usurps strategic thinking. I do not believe that Donald Trump thinks strategically for anything other than himself. He does that for himself, but for other people and the ripple effect, I don't think that happens. And so this is why, again, I don't think this is an ageism thing. What I think is, it is an ego-driven thing. Trump does a lot of trial by error because he listens to the instincts and he does not think strategically, right? To show you the difference in people who are older but making the right decision, when Lyndon Baines Johnson decided not to run for re-election, in 68, where he famously said, I will not seek nor will I accept the nomination of my party for president. No one thought that was unusual. It kind of surprised people, but no one thought it was unusual. They were like, okay, Vietnam, and they were like, he's getting older, He knew when to relinquish power because it wasn't about him. And mind you, he famously supposedly had an ego as a senator. But over the course of Kennedy being assassinated and then him having to actually deal with the country and all this other kind of stuff, he changed and realized this ain't about me. When Nixon resigned, okay, the ultimate political animal America had ever seen to that point, he realized it's not about him and his ego. It's about the country being able to heal. And whether Gerald Ford was right or wrong for pardoning Nixon, he did it because he wanted the nation, in his mind, to heal because the distrust had just ran amok, right? That concept of relinquishing power willingly is not something that is seen in today's politics. We just had a U.S. congressman die, 75 years old, right? Biden, God help him, may not be here much longer, right? He would have been smack dab in the middle of his second term, okay? Right? Okay, we're looking at people like Pelosi. We're talking about a Republican that we couldn't find because they were in like an assisted living home for months.
Dianne Feinstein, man. I mean,
for dying, I mean, come on.
Well,
it's ego, Dan.
So a couple of thoughts, like Instinct. Have you ever read Blink?
No.
Malcolm Gladwell. That's kind of a good book.
I know the book. I've never read it.
Yeah. So, one of the things that's sort of been proven through, not through that book, but through, instinct is sort of honed by repeat experiences. It's really pattern recognition. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, Donald Trump, you can't say that Donald Trump has good instincts when he's awoken at 3 a.m. I mean, that's laughable, right? Like he doesn't have the reps, right? And no president sort of does, right? No. You don't have it's not like you've woken up with a new missile attack from the Russians every day and you know how to play that hand, right? So there's that, but also I think to the point of politicians kind of dying in office or becoming frail and less competent in office, it exists in other fields, but it's kind of unique to politics for how bad it can get. Like if you're an athlete and you're LeBron, right? Like you're LeBron James, you clearly can still put up 28 and 6 or whatever, or you're MJ or whoever. Like you've got a coach, you've got a front office that says, hey man, it's time to hang it up. If you don't, we're going to release you because, we need the room under the salary cap or whatever. And, the same thing will be true to probably a lesser extent, but in other professions. I mean, I have a state medical licensing board, right? If I'm 95 years old and can't, fill out the paperwork, right? So, but politics, you're kind of only held accountable to the voters, really. And in a lot of circumstances, we can be hoodwinked. And so it's really kind of unique in people's ability to hang around long after their expiration date, I think.
No, I think you're right. I think the system has been set up to do that. I find it hilarious that Congress, after Roosevelt, FDR, imposed term limits, but never even had the conversation about themselves. Like, we're not even broaching this subject because it's a sweet gig the way they see it, right? But again, it goes back to ego. This should listen. There's a reason. There's a reason that President Trump, right, has teased the third term. And I'm trying to make sure I say this in a way where I'm like, yeah. He looks around and he sees other people that have significant power still in power, right? Now, granted, part of this is distraction strategically, blah, 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 blah. But in his mind, he doesn't see why he shouldn't be able to. He does not seem to me to be the type that will sit there and look at himself in the mirror every day or once a year and say, am I still up to do the job? Right?
The lesson he learned is that if he peacefully, because it wasn't peaceful, there was January 6th,
Yep.
Which was a coup attempt. But the lesson that Donald Trump learned is that if he relinquishes power, he is subject to paying for the crimes that he's committed.
Bingo.
And I don't have any inside knowledge, but I suspect the man is committing crimes
exactly. And it's amazing to see, right? It's amazing to see how all of the organizations, the foundational organizations of law enforcement in this country, have magically pushed every case that involves him to the back burner. They're not going to be looked at, right? Power, what does they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, what happens when you have that power and your mental facilities start to diminish? What we're seeing a protective cocoon that's been wrapped around him. He did not have that cocoon in the first term. He had people who actually knew how to do their jobs for the most part. Whether you agree with their policies or not, you can't tell me that Rex Tillerson and Mad Dog Mattis and those people did not know how to do the job. We've now replaced them with yes people who have no conceptual idea how to do the job. The Attorney General, if you think I'm making up, Google her behavior in Florida. Okay? Her personal behavior and professional behavior. You look at Kash Patel, just Google anything about him. He's in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Are you serious? These are people who are not serious, that are completely incompetent in doing the job, but they're loyalists. And so what do loyalists do? They enable the manic behavior of the person that gave them the job. Look at Hitler, look at Mussolini, look at all these dictators that stayed in power. Their surrounding inner circle were the biggest enablers their society had.
And that's really what happened with Biden, right? I mean, groupthink is a real thing, Yes. If you're in the group, you think a certain way. That's why you're in the group. That's how you stay in the group.
Yep.
Right. And I don't think there were, based on Tapper's reporting, it sure sounds like there weren't enough voices in the room saying otherwise. And the voices that Biden listened to the most were his wife and his son. And I can't imagine that's different for Donald Trump. Maybe not Melania, but no. I'm sure that like Don Jr. can talk to his dad whenever he wants.
Yeah.
And
you would hope
if he listens to anyone, it's probably him, right? So it's a problem for everyone to be surrounded by yes men.
Yeah.
But it's a bigger problem when you're surrounded by yes men and you happen to be infirm and aged yourself.
Let me ask you this final question. I think it's a good question to end on, because I think we could go all day on this subject.
Yeah.
Who's more to blame for this? The enablers or the people in power? So is it Biden and Trump's fault more than it is the enablers that they have around them? Because at the end of the day, all of us suffer for it.
Yeah.
Democrats, Republicans, we got it with Biden. You're seeing the deterioration. There's going to be a book 5 years from now written about Trump that's going to say the same thing.
Yep.
Right? Let's be real. Whose fault is it, Dan?
I think it's Joe Biden's fault. I think that, like, I mean, if you're so I'll say this about Biden, right?
Yep.
And you correct me, you tell me what you think, but Biden thought or thinks that he's this sort of scrappy fighter who, he got knocked down, he got back up, like he didn't get the VP nod, he got back up and won the presidency. He was, Bernie won New Hampshire and Nevada, and, he still lost. Like, Biden views himself as, Rocky Balboa. And when I read this and, read other things where that's Biden's worldview, that's his self-view, I can assure you that is not how the majority of America thinks about Joe Biden. And so, like, I thought Joe Biden was a career politician, button-down Democrat, nothing special, but oodles of level, like order of magnitude better than Donald Trump. And I think that's how most people saw him, and he didn't see himself that way. And because he saw himself as, this, he saw himself as something special, and I don't think anyone else thought he was, and by anyone else, I mean the voting public. I don't think we viewed him that way, right? Like I didn't think he was cut from the same cloth as John McCain. And so I think his hubris is really to blame. And, I wish the man the best of luck with his health challenges, but his ego, it hurt us all. That's my thought. What do you think?
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I agree with you to the point where I believe his ego and Trump's ego in the last 5-6 years is what has put America on this path where we may not get it back. What I mean by that, the ego of Donald Trump, knowing he actually lost the election, to campaign and say he didn't, to incite the riots of January 6th, and then the ego to pardon those people, I think it's something that is a line of demarcation as far as how we deal with America. And then we double and triple down with Biden, and he knew, there's no question that he knew that he was degrading. I know this because it's not just what we saw on the outside, but let's not forget what happened to his son, Beau. He's always been hypersensitive about health. He's talked about this at length. And his wife, Jill, remember before they announced they were going to run again, everybody was like, well, it's Dr. Biden's choice. She's going to help make that decision. There was a reason they said that, because she knew, right? And what I don't understand between those two men, because like I said, the Biden administration did it right, here recently, and Trump, from the press secretary, the secretary, they see it and they know it, to the point where now they sound like they work for Kim Jong-il in the way they praise this man, because it's simple verbology that he recognizes, right? When they write the tell-all book about Trump and we compare it to the one that we have on Biden, we're going to see the same patterns. And my question for the men and women that allowed both of these people to do this is, why? Was it just your personal gain? Was it just because you had a seat at the table? Because the common theme to me is ego. I want to be in charge. I want to be in the room. I need to be in the spotlight. I mean, dude, I watch Kristi Noem make sure that her freaking hair and all this stuff as she cosplays a freaking ICE agent, this, that, and the other, and then doesn't understand what habeas corpus is when Congress asks her about it. You know what I'm saying? This is what bothers me. And I think you're absolutely right. I blame Biden and I blame Trump. The difference is Biden knows better. Trump can't conceive why this is an issue.
Yeah, Trump's ego, Trump's ego, I don't think Trump could have like a major stroke, and I still think he'd think he,
exactly.
Right.
And still think he looks good and still would spray paint his face. Yeah. But the people around him, the chiefs of staff, the press secretaries and stuff like that, don't come writing a tell-all book after this is all done trying to regain your reputation, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Caroline, whatever her name is going to try to write or do something like Sean Spicer did by going on Dancing with the Stars, to try to regain and salvage some credibility in the public eye, because they know they're doing damage to the institution of the presidency. They know. Mm-hmm. And Biden's people, by covering it up, did damage too. And here we are.
Well, hey, thanks guys for listening. That was sort of a heavier podcast, but the Celtics got knocked out of the playoffs as well. So I'm feeling kind of down right now. So, who do you got winning the NBA Finals, by the way?
If what I saw last night is an indication, the Indiana Pacers are deep, and boy, they're not scared of anybody. They really
They
aren't.
never won one, right? Didn't they win like an ABA championship back in the day?
Yeah. ABA before they
but
joined the
wouldn't
NBA,
want
before they merged.
the
They have never
NBA.
won an NBA championship.
Yeah.
You're gonna, unless the Knicks figure out a way to pull this out, you're gonna have a first-time NBA champion this year.
Yeah, OKC and
Minnesota.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.
All right, thanks, guys.